Thank you.
You are an Israeli, but for the best part of a decade you've lived in a sort of self-imposed exile in the UK, and yet you still seem intellectually drawn to Israel. You still write about Israel. So try and characterize for me your feelings for your home country today.
I think the best way of explaining what I feel is to differentiate between a state and a country, and a state and a regime. I was born in the country, which is Israel and Palestine. I am very attached to the people there. I'm very worried about its future, but I am very opposed to the ideological regime that governs the life of everyone who lives there between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean.
You say opposed to the regime, implying in a way that there's something about the particular colour of the government of the day, but surely it's not the regime you're opposed to, it is the founding ideology of the country, that is Zionism. You are an anti-Zionist, you reject Zionism.
That is true. When I say the regime, I mean that successive governments were all loyal to the same ideological foundation. And indeed, I find the idea that in a country where half of the people are not Jewish, a state cannot be founded on the basis of ethnic exclusivity or supremacy. There needs to be a more democratic, a more egalitarian, a more fair political outfit that would respect the rights and aspirations of everyone who lives there.
Well, we'll get more into that argument, and particularly your claim that half the people are not Jewish in a moment, because obviously you're talking about Israel and the occupied territories. If we are talking about
the Mediterranean, between the Mediterranean and the River
Israel
Jordan
as a nation state, a sovereign nation, then that your figures and your claim would not be true. But we'll get to a discussion of that later. Here's what I find most paradoxical about you. You are clear in your anti-Zionism, and yet it would seem to me that your own life story and your family's life story is the best advertisement for the importance of Zionism that there could ever be.
I disagree with this. I think my life story, especially the fact that my family came from Germany originally and suffered
and escaped from Nazi Germany and found haven in what was to become the Jewish state of Israel, thanks to the development in the 1930s of the Zionist idea.
But it was also a family that was a victim of racism, of ethnic cleansing and extermination. And as such,
Jews who faced extermination,
absolutely,
who needed a haven.
And could not become themselves victimizers who would apply the same methods to someone else.
Your father, to be clear though, was a passionate Zionist.
I don't know if he was a passionate Zionist. He would have preferred probably to come to the United States or England, but their doors were closed. So he, like so many German Jews who were not Zionists, they found their way to Palestine. But I don't think that he would have condoned the ethnic cleansing of 1948. I don't think he would accept that in order to survive, you're entitled to either ethnically cleanse or exterminate someone else. Having a safe haven for people who are victimized does not give them the license to victimize someone else.
Yeah, you've already dropped into conversation the phrase ethnic cleansing. It's become very much associated with your historical work. It's even in the title of one of your perhaps most important books. But it is a phrase which sticks in the throat of so many Israelis, and indeed so many Israeli historians who look at the record of what happened in those founding days that led to the creation of the State of Israel, 47-48, and they do not identify the program of premeditated ethnic cleansing that you claim sits in the record. You've got it wrong.
Ethnic cleansing is not about meditated or only planned idea. Ethnic cleansing is an operation in the end of which one ethnic group is being displaced by another. Nobody can argue with the fact that half of Palestine's people were expelled, that half of Palestine's cities and villages were destroyed, that Palestinians lost Palestine because Zionism created a Jewish state. This is, by even the most conservative definition, an act of ethnic cleansing.
But the issue of meditation or premeditation is absolutely central to your portrayal of what Israel is, how it came to be. Other historians who were with you in that group of revisionists who emerged in the late 1980s, Benny Morris I'm thinking of, they don't dispute anything you've just said about the facts, that so many hundreds of thousands, about 700,000 Arabs were forced to flee their homes as the Jewish agency established what was to become Israel, the Jewish state. That's not in dispute. What you say, though, is that there were meetings in which Ben-Gurion and his key advisors planned this operation. And they say, no, understand that war is tough. In the heat of battle, things happen. But it was ad hoc, it was not premeditated, and in some cases, local commanders could be blamed, certainly not all of it down to Ben-Gurion's plan.
If this is so, one has to answer a very simple question. Why were half of the people who became Palestinian refugees were already expelled before the war even started? By the 15th of May 1948, the whole urban space of Palestine was de-Arabized. The Palestinians lost the urban space. By the 15th of May, before one Arab soldier entered the land of Palestine, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were evicted by force from the countryside. Now, the evidence, I think, is quite clear. And I think that the documentation, especially the documentation that came out in 1998, Israel releases military documentation only 50 years after the event, show very clearly a meditated, a planned, a structured idea of how to turn Palestine, which was basically an Arab country, into a Jewish country, a Jewish state, through the means of ethnic cleansing. I think that documentation is now much more clear and carries out the evidence. And I think
I'm not steeped in the documentation, but let me just put one. I mean, we don't want to get too hung up on every single detail of what happened in those early days of 48, but just one key piece of evidence which would, to me, plant a seed of doubt about your version of events. 24th of March, the Chief of Staff of the Haganah, which was to become, of course, the Israeli Defense Forces, but at the time was the Jewish agency, sort of military agency operation, he said this, the Chief of Staff, to all his field commanders, they must, quote, protect the full rights, the needs and freedoms of Arabs living in the Hebrew space, what was to become the Jewish state. He wrote that.
Yeah, he may have written it, but I've seen the group of commands that was sent to each commander of a brigade and each commander of a battalion. And their commands were very, very clear. They had to occupy the villages, expel the people, detonate the houses. And these commands came at the 1st of April. So I don't know what he wrote 7 days before, but I think what really is important now is that we are also now exploring the oral history of 1948 from the Jewish side. And maybe because they are old and are very close to their deathbed, commanders of the Haganah are now admitting that their mission was to cleanse Palestine from the Palestinians. I don't know why people find it so difficult to believe. This was the major point of Zionism, was to cleanse the land.
If I may interrupt for a second, this was also an existential war. It was clear in 1948 that unless the Jews fought and held this space, they could be exterminated. And in the end, as Benny Morris, who for a long time was your sort of historical collaborator, but is now, it has to be said, your historical sort of nemesis, Benny Morris says, look, in this sort of war, stuff happens. Really bad stuff happens. But in the end, it can be justified. The Jews did what they had to do.
It's amazing. We're talking of what possibly the Palestinians could have done to the Jews. And this is really flimsy history. This is not serious history. To write a book of what could have happened is really bad. I'm writing a book of what had happened. And what had happened is a crime against humanity. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity. The Zionist movement was founded for very good reasons. What it did in 1948 is unforgivable, is unacceptable.
Let's keep